Since I was under contract with Caribbean Films, and we only shot 2 movies a year, there were often times in between those 2 movies, or right before we shot them, where we really weren't able to keep the schedule we had hoped because some of the integral players, like our cinematographer or something, maybe our director, was involved in another production. So we had some unexpected down days when we were in California. On these down days, my agent, Jim South, with World Modeling Agency, the most popular agent in the time, probably about the only one, would get me modeling gigs for different men's magazines. And I really didn't know when I was posing for sure which magazine it would be in or things like that most of the time. So he got me a gig to model for Steve Hicks. And Steve Hicks is one of the best photographers I've ever worked with. I've worked with some really good photographers and some really bad ones. But Steve Hicks was marvelous. And we shot for several days. And I knew when we were shooting that this was going to be for Penthouse. I learned so much from Steve, not only as a model, but he would take the time to explain lighting techniques and bracketing and his different things that he did to make his photographs stand out. So I knew it was going to be in Penthouse. But most of the time in these magazines, they just change my name. They put whatever name they seem is appropriate, and they make up some little side story, and it has absolutely nothing to do with me whatsoever. So the only thing that shows you that it's me is the photograph, but all the names have been changed and everything else. However, as time progressed, I learned that this was going to be different. This was supposed to be the first in their series about actresses, and they were going to keep my name. As a matter of fact, they called me on the phone at my grandmother's house to do an interview. So I did, they asked me questions, and they listened to what I said, they recorded it, and when it came out, they quoted me precisely. They really did a marvelous job. Now, I still didn't know that this was going to be in the most popular men's magazine ever, Penthouse, September 1984. You might not know, you might not even have been born yet, but that was the magazine with George Burns and Vanessa Williams, Miss America, on the cover. So it got a lot of attention. And as a matter of fact, it had to go back to print 3 different times. There were like 10, 15 million copies of that magazine sold. And it had the centerfold of Tracy Lords. Now, I don't think it used her real name, but the thing was, and nobody knew it at the time, but she was underage. I don't know if you know about that whole scandal, but she got a fake ID with the government's help. Basically, she had a California driver's license that said that she was of age. Well, you can't really hold photographers responsible if the ID is a legitimate driver's license issued by the DMV. I mean, how are they supposed to know different? If it's an obvious fake, yeah, sure. But this was issued by the DMV. So anyway, not to get distracted with all of that, I was so lucky to be in that magazine. It did so much for my career. And of course, they used my photos in other Penthouse publications as well as time went on. Now, it just so happened I was on the road dancing in Connecticut, and I got notice that Bob Guccione in New York City would like to meet me. He extended an invitation for me and my husband to come visit him at his penthouse. Now, this was before we had children, so it was just the 2 of us on the road, basically. So we could, go before my shows started. And we mentioned this to the club owner, and he says, well, I have a limo driver and a limo. Why don't you take the limo? I'm sure my limo driver would be happy to go, give him a little tip, whatever. And I'm like, well, of course, So he took us down there to New York City, so we didn't have to drive in the city. Thank goodness. What a mess that would have been. So we find the place, and our limo driver parks outside and sends us up. Well, Bob was so gracious, and this place was amazing. He had, in the restroom, printed paper towels with the day's date on them. I mean, this was just over the top. And Bob was so nice and friendly, so was his wife, and he showed us his Rhodesian Ridgeback dogs. He had 2 of them, and one of them had chipped its canine tooth when it was a baby, so he replaced it with a gold tooth. But the nice thing was I got to thank him for putting me in the magazine. It used to be that Bob would do all of the photographs for the magazine, but, he kind of stopped doing that and let other people take charge. And I got to say, Steve Hicks was probably the best photographer I had ever worked with. But I thanked him very much, for that opportunity to be in that particular magazine. And the gentleman that was there, kind of his helper or his manservant or whatever you would want to call it, his Jeeves, he took the dogs for a walk. And when he came back, he said, "Is that your limousine down there?" And I said, "Yeah." I mean, it's not mine personally. I wasn't going to explain that. But I said, "Well, yeah, that's how we got here." He says, "I talked to your limo driver. He's a very nice guy." I said, "Yes, he is. He's very good, very nice." He goes, "I didn't know that you had a limo. That's very impressive." Oh, so he and Bob and his wife were all very impressed. It was funny. I'm just a girl from southern Indiana, well, born and raised in Indianapolis, But it was a good opportunity. It just so happened to work out right like that, But it was really neat to be in that magazine and to have that opportunity. Like I said, that opened many doors for my career, and it was a wonderful opportunity. Later, I'll tell you about my personal experience with meeting and getting to know Tracy Lords and our little private conversation we had about the business and how she felt about the business and her wanting to get out of the business. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thank you very much for subscribing to my channel.